Questions of Doom. Hello and welcome back to another Questions of Doom. In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address, as displayed on the YouTube channel homepage, but as you'll also see at the end of this video. In answering these questions by video, it is my fond hope, as ever, that the video, or rather the answer, will not just be useful to the person who's asked the question, but also anyone else out there who might be wondering the same thing. Now, today's question of doom comes from Portugal, and it comes via Tiago Rocha. Dear Mr. Soup, it says, I am an archaeology student from Portugal and I'm doing work for my classical civilizations class. More specifically probably he meant to say, about the Roman urbanism in the Orient, specifying some cities such as Philippopolis, Gerasa, Bostra and Palmyra. Until now I've always thought that Romans had just one type of urbanism, and there is for applying it to, if not all, major cities in the Roman Empire, independently of its location. Therefore, I wanted to ask if there are many different types of urbanism used by the Romans. Did it change in different areas? Since I am, and have been for a while, a follower of Archaeosoup, I was wondering if you wanted and could do a short video talking about urbanism in general and explaining the overall differences in the major types of urbanisms used in ancient Rome. I wanted to use, if you allow me, this video as an introduction for my work. I would really appreciate your help. Sincerely, Tiago Rocha. P.S. Continue archaeologizing the world. Good luck. Well, thank you, Tiago. You ask a very interesting question, and I have to say, straight off the bat, the one thing I'm not going to do is go through all the different types of Roman urbanism, for there are as many types of and variants of Roman urbanism as there are essentially Roman towns, certainly Roman major cities. But I will talk to you about the issues surrounding the variation in Roman urbanism. First of all, I can recommend this really good book, Roman Urbanism, edited by Helen M. Parkins. It's from Routledge Publishing House. I'll put the details to it below. It's just a series of essays which are good to consider when you're considering this topic, Roman urbanism. But I suppose the key thing to start with, really, aside from that book suggestion, is this concept of Romans spreading the urban paradigm. There is this idea that the Romans went around essentially planting cities in a Roman style. It's quite specifically after the style of the city of Rome. Not just a cultural style, but actually, I suppose, looking up and looking back towards the light of the civilization that was Rome. There's this idea that that was the case. And to a certain extent this is true. Roman cities did have standard features. Roman towns often had these features as well. In fact, many Roman camps had these features after a while. These features included things like, for example, a forum, a place where people could meet, trade, pay their taxes, do business in public. It was an important place, the forum, for Roman commerce, the control of the population, but also actually the Roman sense of doing things above board. If you were doing things right, things were done in the forum. Bathhouses, again, often a feature of Roman urban sites. Certainly cities, more often than not towns, and sometimes even smaller places. For example, even tiny little Prestatyn, where I'm from, in North Wales, we have our own Roman bathhouse. It's the only bathhouse on the North Wales coast, as far as I'm aware, between Chester and Bangor, but unless it's there. So even these backwater, little middle of nowhere places had bathhouses. Also, other things that we think of when we think of Roman urbanism, often, for example, the larger towns and cities would have some form of amphitheatre. Chester, for example, a city not too far from Prestatyn, Chester, just across the border in England, has one of the largest amphitheatres in Britain. I believe places like St Albans had impressive event spaces, as it were, so racing tracks and amphitheatres. They turn up all over the place, as far-flung as Britain, in Italy, in Spain and Portugal, in France, in the Middle East, as it were, and also in Africa as well. These things do turn up. So there are common things which make appearances all over the Roman world. But I would argue that actually what's happening is that there is a veneer of Roman urbanism often being applied to these places. Once you scratch the surface, really what looks like a Roman city, often underneath and often certainly outside, away from the centre, becomes very quickly very different. And also actually the layout of the different cities is very variable. For example, and this is probably my favourite example of this, is actually Roman houses in, for example, Tunisia. There are Roman houses which are built very specifically to meet the needs of the local people, and they're actually copying, they're adapting local building techniques. And that is essentially you have an underground home and an above ground home. So in these Roman houses you have features such as the atrium, you have the places where people eat, the places where people gather, you have the kitchens, or a standard Roman house. But it's copied room for room below ground. This is because in the height of the summer it's much easier to live underground, and these are the kind of dwellings which actually we see, for example, in the Star Wars films as well. They're famously Luke's uncle, the Skywalker Ranch, as it were. No, so that's where George Lucas lived. The Skywalker homestead is both above and below ground. That local building technique was actually adopted by the Romans, or rather, I suppose they adopted a Roman veneer to it, but they continued to build in the way that made sense for the area. And that's something to keep in mind. Roman urbanism had to adapt to wherever it was. In Britain it was much wetter and colder than it was in other parts of Europe. In northern France the social situation was much different, and the economic situation, to what it was in southern France. In Africa, again, the environment really dictated actually what Roman urbanism would look like. There's also the question of what is Roman. I mean, yes, we've touched on things like amphitheatres and bathhouses and things like that, but actually if you think about it, the Roman style and the Roman culture, certainly the Roman architectural philosophy, changed dramatically over the course of the history of the Roman Republic and then what we call the Roman Empire. It changed immensely over those centuries. For example, in the lifetime of Augustus, famously he said, I found Rome a city of bricks, but I left it a city of marble. So in his own lifetime, and as he would probably say, largely due to him, the Romans dramatically changed what it was to build in the Roman style, which itself was actually an adaptation of the Greek style. So some people actually call this stuff, I suppose, like a Hellenistic, actually, a broader Mediterranean, Romano-Greek style of building. But these styles, these features, they had to be adopted by the Romans first, and then eventually some of these things bled out elsewhere. Things like, for example, having naked statues in public were very surprising to the Romans initially, and Augustus was directly involved in sort of feeding that to the Roman public and getting them a bit more comfortable with it. That said, though, I mean, we're giving the Mediterranean people, the Greeks and the Romans largely, an awful lot of credit here, where maybe they don't deserve all the credit. There are actually hints of urbanism in other parts of the world. For example, in Britain we found what looked like almost Mediterranean-style towns, grid layouts, long before the Romans get here. I think one in particular down in the south. This is probably due to contact with the Roman world, trading, for example, salt for wine or tin, this kind of thing. But nonetheless, it shows an independent source of urbanism, which the Romans eventually come upon in places like Britain and then modify. So again, this idea that the Romans went around stamping their sort of, no, you will have this, you will have this, isn't quite that simple. And certainly, yes, you had to have certain things in order for, say, for example, to do your business as a Roman, but you didn't necessarily have to have them all the time. And this applies to, for example, graves. People would have Roman graves on the outside, but inside these tombs, it would look very local. It applies to clothing. You'd dress Roman in public, but maybe at home you'd dress a little bit more locally, as it were. And therefore it does apply most certainly to towns. Now, a good example of this actually comes from the Iberian Peninsula, and I'm sure you're aware of this, Thiago, where, especially in Spain, the Romans actually decided to give and hand over, for example, the planning process to local people. This is part of the strategy of pacification. They decided to say, well, you can put that where you want, and you can move these around wherever you want them, whatever's best. And essentially, there were letters passing between Spain and Rome talking about, well, actually, what do we need here? Can you send an architect to consult on this? So there was continual reference back to Rome and to the Roman ideal, but the ability to actually have a little bit of Roman, a little bit of local influence, in Roman town planning was part of the whole process of pacifying the locals, putting their energies into planning the future as opposed to fighting for the past. And this is one of the reasons why everywhere you go in the Roman world, the Roman urbanism, the Roman paradigm, is adapted, is altered, is changed, and in some cases is just thinly pasted over the top of what was a native large town or city. Now, finally, and hopefully I've discussed enough of the elements surrounding this topic to give you some food for thought. But finally, one thing I would like to talk about is the fact that not all things from Rome made it out of Rome. I suppose what I'm saying is that there are some specifically Roman, i.e. Rome from Rome, features of architecture which aren't really replicated in other parts of the Roman world. And I was talking about this with Mrs. Soup over breakfast this morning, and I'll tell you what she said in a moment. But what I'm referring to are the insula, the tower blocks, the flats that you would have in Rome, in Ostia. I think some of them found in Pompeii. These essentially slum housing. Now, Mrs. Soup said, oh yes, what we need now to finish off our lovely new Roman town is a good slum. We need to build a slum. Well, it's just not like Rome, is it? We need a good slum. And she's right in that sense. You don't design a slum or slum housing into your new Roman city. That's probably why these blocks of flats weren't really exported across the world. Hail Caesar! From here on you will have a forum, a bathhouse, and also bespoke slum housing where people can suffer and die. So not all of these things were actually mapped out across the Roman world, and often, for example, these blocks of flats were very dangerous, especially in the upper floors. Fire hazards, wind and weather erosion, stairs, a lack of, for example, health and safety features. That wasn't something which they exported. So not everything in the Roman paradigm actually, or rather, so not everything from Rome was included in the Roman paradigm. They didn't just sort of take off a plaster cast of Rome and put it on wherever they went. And I suppose that's the key to understanding Roman urbanism. It's the fact that they were sort of exporting an ideal of Rome and an idea of Rome. And therefore they didn't actually take everything everywhere. And in many ways that's a good thing, because as I say, as Mrs. Soup was saying, you don't necessarily want to plan slum and these apartment blocks into your shining new microcosm of the Roman world. So I suppose hopefully that this discussion has sort of gone some way to helping to think around this topic. The trick, Thiago, is to look closely at where you are. Look closely at what it is that the local people required. Were they happy to see the Romans? Were they not happy? Were they living in particular environmental conditions, or was it quite a nice, temperate area? Was it economically and politically and socially stable, or did you actually have to put off the grand building projects and just build small towns, small villages, almost like vicus living dwelling areas instead of grand city projects? It's all about the local area, and it's all about adapting that paradigm to meet the local needs, but also to make sure that the locals aren't overwhelmed by something which isn't right for them, because that actually, believe it or not, that was an important part of encouraging people into the Roman world. It's been often been said that, well, I've heard it said that the Romans were like a gang of thieves, and in order to keep everyone happy, they'd have to share out the loot. For example, rights to be a Roman citizen or actual money. And the more loot, so the more thieves they had in their gang, the more loot they needed, and the best way to keep on adding to their gang, to add to their ability to pay and keep client kings happy, for example, the stronger that need was, the best way to do that was to make sure that you weren't changing things too much. You made it clear what the rules were. If you wanted to be a Roman, if you wanted to trade with Romans, you had to do it this way, but you also allowed them to worship their own gods privately. You allowed them a certain amount of freedom and cultural continuity below the surface. Anyway, I've talked about this for quite a while now. Hopefully, as I said, this video has been useful. If any of you guys out there have any comments or suggestions or thoughts, or actually particular sites where this tension between a Roman public image and a local private image is evident, please do comment below. I'm sure Thiago, in fact, I would love to read about those. Yeah, hopefully this has been good. So, as ever, until next time, guys, do take care. Bye-bye.